Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 16 of an exciting new series. What if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Bloomerbill on fanfiction.net. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. So far, Miyake's internship has gone over quite well in Kogo's opinion. His first day on patrol had been peaceful with few interruptions. There was a mugging, but Miyake was able to subdue the man in a few seconds despite his inexperience in the area. But as the boy explained, it was not that hard to figure out with his instincts. Miyake's combat wasn't refined in any form, but it was impressive for someone untrained, and giving the boy some training in the basics was the goal on the second day. The third, however, was spent doing more of what Miyake had come to him for, and learning more about the rescue side of heroics, including all the code words that to quickly relay another person's condition. And today, Kogo was going to bring Miyake to meet some colleagues, namely Tsunagu, since Kogo was sure that the blonde would give him some good advice about working in tandem with the other branches of heroics during a mission. But as he was getting ready to lead Miyake out to Tsunaga's agency, but someone was standing at the entrance had caused him to pause. Standing in the walkway, just beyond the doors, was a thin teenage with long dark brown hair that held his head such a way that their hair covered their face. But it was the fact they half covered in blood that had shocked him. Rinkuin? Miyake called, stepping closer to the teen. The teen lifted their head, showing two listless gray eyes as they stared at Miyake. Despite this being quite an awful situation to be dropped on them, so suddenly Miyake had not flinched and moved to crouch in front of the teenager. She went too far, didn't she? Miyake asked, apparently knowing this person very well, as Run nodded their head. Miyake, thrilled in an understanding way, "Is your father okay? We can send someone from the in-house medical unit to mend his injuries." Miyake offered, choosing words very carefully, and tears beaded the teen's eyes as they nodded, raising their hands to sign. She broke his arm. They paused to pat their left arm. "And a knife. She stabbed him here." They pointed to just below the belly button. Miyake nodded, clicking the button on his crest, activating his radio. "This is Koi. There has been Delta Alpha. The perpetrator is a pale brunette woman in her 30s with blue eyes, no mutations. The victim is her husband, a young man with gray hair and eyes, no mutations, and his situation is critical according to the witness. Send a medical unit equipped with a blood, too." After Miyake listed off an address, Kogo shook himself from his stupor, and as much as he wanted to ask from where Miyake knew this person from, that was hardly the most pressing issue. As he turned his focus to the teen, "Are you hurt?" he asked, and the teen raised their head to look up at him. Ren hesitated for a second, then shook their head. "Is the blood on you your father's?" Kogo inquired, though he personally doubted it was, since it looked like blowback, not a splash typical from a knife wound. Ren shook their head again, confirming his thoughts. "Where is it from then?" Kogo questioned, and Ren brought their hands up only to pause and glance at Miyake. "I know, Giselle, little one," Kogo softly assured, recognizing the uncertainty on Ren's face. "It's mother's." Ren simply answered once Miyake nodded in confirmation. Judging from the amount of blood on Ren, Kogo was not sure the teen's mother would survive long, and the address Miyake had said was at least 10, no 12 blocks away from the agency. "Ren, was it?" Kogo asked, and Ren nodded. "Why did you come here? Your home is quite far from here," Kogo inquired. Off the top of his head, Kogo knew there were at least 2 other agencies and a police station within a much closer distance to what he believed was Ren's house, if he heard Miyake correctly. "To turn myself in," Ren answered, and Kogo felt himself become uneasy. "For what, Ren?" Kogo asked, then his blood went cold as Ren, without blinking an eye, signed, "For killing my mother with my quirk." An hour later, Kogo found himself somberly staring at Ren from the other side of two-way glass with a heavy heart that ached for the poor boy. After the boys answered his question, Kogo knew he wouldn't be able to meet with Tsunagu as planned, and texted his friend as such before he called up the police looking for a specific detective's aid. Said detective now sat across from the boy. Kogo then instructed Miyake through the proper procedure for what they were supposed to when someone, specifically a minor, turned themselves into them. The phenomenon was rare in this day and age, but sometimes people would turn themselves in for their crimes, and hero agencies had a protocol to follow if criminals showed up at their door, instead of a police station for the chain of custody. Ren, for his part, hadn't put up any fight, as Miyake, gently led him along on what they were doing until Detective Sakachi arrived for the interview. Kugo had of course briefed the man on what they had found so far, starting from what Ren had told them when he showed up and what was discovered by the officer sent to the boy's house with his medical unit. Ren's father, Soki, had been found unconscious in the living room with injuries matching what Ren had told them. His mother, Naomori Akira, a well-known doctor for the area, however, had her head blown to pieces with a gun in close range, though no such weapons were found anywhere in the house. Naturally, most of them did not know what to think, as it was still the preliminary stages of the investigation, and they did not have all the facts yet. But if what Ren had said was true, then the boy would be facing years in prison after spending 3 years in juvie. Given the seriousness of the case, it was only natural Kugo asked Sakachi to come do the interview. It was not every day that a 13-year-old turned themselves in for murdering their parent with their quirk, and they had to be thorough with this. "Hello, Ren. My name is Sakachi, and I'll be the one interviewing, all right?" Sakachi asked, and Ren frowned. "Can I have Miyake with me?" Ren requested, and Miyake glanced at him silently asking for permission, and Kugo was conflicted. On one hand, an intern really should not be getting any more involved in a messy case like this, but Ren might stop being cooperative, which could be a problem, and Miyake had an established connection with the boy. "I suppose we could arrange that. I need to discuss that with his mentor," Sakachi told Ren, and the boy glumly nodded. Sakachi stood up and peeked his head out at Kugo and Miyake. "May I?" Miyake asked Kugo. Kugo sighed before reluctantly nodding his head, and Miyake walked into the room with Sakachi and sat next to Ren. There had been a woman from CPS and had come to represent him, but Ren had made it noticeably clear that he did not want the woman anywhere near him, so she was doing paperwork around somewhere here after Ren refused any legal counsel. "All right, before we begin, I am legally obligated to inform you my quirk is a lie detector, and I can't turn it off, so please be aware and refrain from lying about anything, as I will be able to tell." Sakachi informed the two. "Okay." Ren signed, and Sakachi winced. "Unfortunately, my quirk needs a vocal answer from you, Ren," Sakachi explained, and Ren seemed to wilt at that, something that made Kugo's heart twist even more painfully. Miyake, without hesitation, draped his tail over Ren's shoulders and turned at Sakachi. "Do you have a pair of quirk cuffs?" Miyake asked, surprising him. "Yes." Sakachi answered, confused, until Ren's eyes widened with realization, and he held out his arms, waiting to be cuffed. Renkuin's quirk is vocal. He can't speak without triggering his quirk. Miyake explained, and understanding dawned on Sakachi's face. One that he felt himself, since it was not uncommon for people with vocal quirks to have communication problems. "I see. Is it passive like my own?" Sakachi guessed as he gently cuffed Ren. "Why, yes." Ren mumbled, hardly loud enough to be heard, clearly unused to speaking, making Sakachi wince before he nodded. "All right, can you please tell me what happened today, before you left for Gang Orca's agency?" Sakachi requested, and Ren nodded. "Ma and Pa fight. Ma loud and Pa tai to Ma. Make Ma no mad," Ren said, struggling with speaking in full sentences, and the word make. "I see. Did they fight a lot?" Sakachi questioned. "Yes. Mom mad lots," Ren confirmed nonchalantly, and Kugo wondered just how often Akira was angry for Ren to be so numb to this. "Ma mean to Pa," Ren added, looking a touch sad as he said it. "Does she get physical with your father?" Sakachi asked, and Ren nodded again. "Yes, grab hair like this." Ren set his hands going behind his head and grabbing a fistful of his hair, making, "Did she do that often? Pull his hair?" Sakachi inquired, shifting slightly in his seat. "Yes, ma hit and kick and yell at Pa most days," Ren explained, avoiding Sakachi's eyes as he ducked his head. "Has your mom ever hurt you too?" Sakachi pressed. "No, Panola ma hit. It made Mom more mad," Ren told him. "Do you know why she was mad at you, Ren?" Sakachi asked, and the boy nodded. "I talk too much. Ma no like me speak, because quirk," Ren explained, making Kugo close his eyes and take a deep breath as his clawed fingertips dug into his arm. Kugo's soft spot for children was never something he hid, and he has had experience with domestic/child abuse cases before, but that hardly made his instinctual urge to maul child abusers wane. He is simply better at hiding it, but quirk-related abuse was too much of a sore spot for him to believably hide it. "Can you tell me what was different about today's fight between your parents?" Sakachi questioned, and Ren wilted slightly. Just know ma mad and mean like most days, but I just know ma go hurt pa bad in my gut, the boy somberly explained. Ma was mad I speak more, ma say that be for break pa arm. Ma had used knife be for on pa, but this time different. I know ma no stop at hurt pa. Rin said with certainty a child should not have when talking about their parents killing one another. I go between and use me quirk to made ma stop. Rin added. Gang Orca mentioned that. But can you please give me more details about that? From the scene it appears your mother was shot. Sakachi questioned, and Rin frowned and turned to Miyake. Can I just show them instead? My throat is starting to hurt. Rin asked in sign. Miyake thrilled, pondering it before standing up. Yeah, let me grab something from the break room really quick. Miyake replied, swiftly exiting the room and breezing past Kugo before could ask where the boy was going. But he did not have to, since the boy returned within the minute carrying a watermelon of all things into the room and placing it on the table. Can you please remove the cuffs? Rinkuin won't harm either of us. Miyake requested. Sakachi frowned, but ultimately took the cuffs off. You might want to stand over here with me. Miyake advised Sakachi from a far corner of the room. Sakachi, taking said warning, stood up and moved to stand next to Miyake in the far corner. Run rubbed his wrist, then pointed at the watermelon with his thumb out, and the sound of something like a gunshot following the boy's only word almost drowned out it. Bang. The watermelon exploded the same way Kugo has seen fruit does at a shooting range, surprising him just as much. It shocked Sakachi. Rinkuin's quirk is called word inflection. If he says a word like break while pointing at, say, a vase, then it will shatter. It is a passive quirk that on everything, including people, and cannot be turned off without outside intervention of a quirk blocker. Miyake explained for Ren. I see. Sakachi replied, recovering a fair bit better than Kugo had. I'll clean this up while you continue the interview. Miyake told the man before he got to work mopping up the guts of the watermelon with a towel from one of his side pockets. Ren, for his part, stared at the main part of the watermelon that was whole aside from the hole he put into the middle. Ren, Sakachi called, and the boy met his eyes. Would you like to put the cuffs back on, Rin? Sakachi asked, and Rin nodded, offering up his wrists again for him. We could take a break if you need one, Rin. Sakachi offered, but the boy shook his head. Want to be done. Rin wheezed out. Sakachi glanced back, sharing an uneasy look with Kugo before turning back to Rin. All right, can you tell me what you did after you used your quirk, Rin? Sakachi asked, pushing on. I checked Pa. Then asked Deku, who should I go to? Rin answered, and Sakachi paused at that name. Deku? Could you please elaborate who that is, Rin? We didn't find any evidence of a fourth person being at the scene. Sakachi requested, and Rin nodded. Deca Sensei, he nice and give me stuff for Pa that made Pa happy. Deca know there? I just call him. Deca help me speak, and he know lots, so I asked who he would go to turn me in. Rin told him, his mood lifting slightly as he spoke of the man. Is he why you turned yourself over to Gang Orca at his agency? Sakachi asked. Yes, Deca give me directions to building. Rin confirmed. Okay. Did anything happen while you were on the way over to the agency? Sakachi questioned. I lost phone. Trip and phone fall in gutter. No member where? Rin replied, and Sakachi nodded. I think that should be it for now, Rin. If there are more questions later, I'll make sure to have someone bring cuffs so you can speak. Sakachi promised. Me like hands better. Rin said with a shrug. That should be fine unless we need to use my quirk for the record. Sakachi assured as he again uncuffed the boy and put the cuffs away. Do you have any questions, Rin? Sakachi inquired. Is my dad okay? Rin asked back. He's recovering in the medical office in Gang Orca's agency until we can arrange for him to be transferred to a hospital. Sakachi answered, and Rin sighed, relieved. Kugo wasn't sure what to expect when he and Sakachi filed Ren's statement, but receiving separate calls from Nizu and Sir Night-Eye wasn't even in the realm of possibility, but here they both were waiting for the two heroes to show up for a debriefing about the case, since both of them were very interested in this Deca Sensei Ren mentioned. They hardly had time to speculate why both the heroes were so interested before Sir Night-Eye had arrived in person as promised. Gang Orca, Detective Sakachi. Sir greeted a slight bit more tense towards the detective, sir. Sakachi replied, similarly tense, until Nizu managed to surprise them all by popping out of nowhere. Hello again, Sakamata, the rodent exclaimed as he quickly crawled up his cape and sat himself on Kugo's shoulder. Nizu-san. Kugo responded with a polite nod. Kogo found that Nizu wasn't so bad if you could get past the way he dissect your every movement and your whole life story with very glance. There was also this oddly predatory presence that constantly surrounded the mammal that he could only pick up on because his quirk was animal-based, and that came with certain senses that only other animal-based quirk people seem to have. Apologies for not explaining the urgency for the visit to Sakamata. However, I can assure you that it was not without a valid reason. Niza told him before turning his sharp gaze on us, "Sir, I can safely assume you're here for the same reason, sir." Niza commented, and Sir nodded his head, pushing up his glasses. "Indeed, Niza-san." Sir confirmed. Nizu's ear twitched but did not say anything just yet and turned back to Kogo. "So tell me, Sakamata, Detective Sakachi, have either of you ever heard of the alias of Deca Sensei before now?" Nizu asked. "I'm afraid not." Kogo answered, and Sakachi frowned. "I've heard bits and pieces about you trying to start an official investigation, but it hasn't been approved yet." Sakachi told the mammal. "Correct, you are Sakachi. Deca Sensei, from I have managed to gather, is an underground informant that has multiple ties to some very powerful groups, and that he seems to have been around since September 72, one powerful enough to directly manipulate the criminals around him into not committing crime." Nizu explained, and Sir nodded. "And it is possible that Deca Sensei has been able to aid others turn their quirks into far more dangerous weapons." Sir commented, and Kogo's eyes widened at the same time. Sakachi's mouth fell open. "What? How could someone like that get around without us hearing about him before now?" Sakachi questioned, his eyes on Sir, and Kogo could tell he was asking Sir something between the lines, but he had no idea what. Unfortunately, due to Deca Sensei methods, he has been able to completely remain under the radar, and the only confirmation we have that Deca even exists is because multiple criminals in different areas of Japan have mentioned him before being arrested. Sir sternly replied, "However, that wasn't enough to get anyone to approve the investigation before now." Sir added, scowling. "That was up now. The criminals who were arrested would never confirm who he was or even speak more than a few words about him. Namori Ren is the only person to have gone on record about Deca Sensei and confirm his existence." Niza cheerfully said, "I see." Sakachi tersely replied, shooting a glance at Sir, which the man avoided. "May we meet with Namori-kun to ask him more about his relationship with Deca Sensei?" Sir questioned, and Kogo felt slightly uneasy with how readily Sir was to jump into basically interrogating a traumatized boy that killed his own mother not even 3 hours ago, after she almost killed his father in front of him. The boy answers to his given name, Ren, and you may ask Ren your questions after we determine he is in a mentally stable place for such a conversation, given he has been through quite a lot of trauma in a short period of time. Kogo answered, and Sir must have picked on his thinly veiled irritation, because the man suddenly turned slightly bashful. "Yes, of course, Gang Orca. I do not mean to impose. I just wish to ensure we are able to take care of Deca Sensei before he has the chance to become even more powerful than he already is." Sir apologized, and we shall, without steamrolling an abused minor fragile state of mind simply because we are getting impatient. Kogo firmly stated, taking full advantage of the single inch to glare down into Sir's eyes. Sir gulped naturally. Sir agreed, far more subdued under his gaze. "Perhaps to gain a better understanding of the situation, would you kindly inform us of all the details of the crime so that we may approach Rin-kun without de-stressing the boy?" Niza suggested. "I wasn't able to read the full report before I arrived Sakamata, and I doubt Sir was able to read more than myself." Nizu admitted. Kogo took a deep breath and nodded. "Of course, Niza-san. And I should expect that Detective Sakachi and I shall be properly read in on the situation with Deca Sensei?" Kogo asked, glancing at the mammal on his shoulder. "Absolutely, Sakamata. I would be happy to." Nizu accepted with a soft smile. Naomasa groaned, rubbing the bridge of his nose while Sasaki stood across from him with his head held down and his eyes locked on his feet, the both of them standing outside the station. "Let me get this straight. After you left Tashinori's agency, you've been digging into all for one on your own, in your own time, told none of us anything you found. And once you looked at the file Niza-san sent you about Deca Sensei, you thought that he was connected to all for one and didn't contact any of us about it?" Naomasa questioned. "Yes. True, Sasaki answered. And what part of that plan sounded rational in your mind? I can understand if you were hesitant to tell Tashinori, but why the hell wouldn't you tell me? Or Gran Torino? If you really found something about All for One, don't you know how much trouble we'd all be in because you didn't think to bother voicing any of your concerns? Naomasa asked, feeling a touch irritated with the man. A feeling that was quite justified given that they were talking about All for One. Naomasa wasn't on the battlefield like Sasaki was, but he damn well knew what the aftermath entailed. All the fights he had with Tashinori to not leave his bed after that bastard all but gutted him, and the countless times he had to remind Tashinori to take his meds on time or scold him for going over his time limit. Sasaki crossed his arms and leaned back slightly. Torino-san was quite clear that I wasn't to bother contacting either of you unless it was an emergency. True, Sasaki explained, and Naomasa didn't need his court to know that. He winced when he remembered the massive blowout between Sasaki and Gran Torino in the hospital, when Sasaki said he was quitting as All Might's sidekick. There had been no love lost that day between all three of them, and Naomasa admittedly had a very strained relationship with Sasaki after he left Tashinori like that. In a hospital bed, missing half his organs, and having broken the one boundary that Tashinori had made in their friendship, and Sasaki had kept to that decision and never looking back after he left Tashinori's side. Naomasa was quite bitter over the whole incident. Naomasa could understand if Sasaki was upset Tashinori wouldn't listen to them about not working himself to death. But Sasaki had straight up abandoned Tashinori when he was in one of his lowest points in Tashinori's life. And he was one of the reasons Tashinori had thrown himself even further into his work to forget all about the heartache of losing Sasaki as a friend. Tashinori could lie as much as he wanted, and he could even lie to himself that he didn't care, but Naomasa knew the complete cutting of ties hurt his friend deeply. But Naomasa wasn't so bitter that he'd place all of the blame on Sasaki. Sasaki may not have reached out to them, but Naomasa hadn't tried to reach out either. Naomasa took a deep breath and calmed down his irate nerves, right? Can you tell me how you think Deca Sensei is connected to All for One? You don't think? Naomasa couldn't bring himself to ask. The idea of that bastard still being alive made it feel like everything in his body withered up inside of him. No. Tosh, Yagi-san was very thorough as he bashed All for One's head in. I think this Deca Sensei is some kind of descendant, a son, or perhaps a grandchild that has a similar quirk. True, Sasaki quickly corrected, finally raising his head, meeting his eyes, and waving his hands dismissively. A child of All for One? Naomasa repeated, shocked. Naomasa knew deep down that All for One was just another human, but the idea that he'd ever have kids was a hard pill to swallow. Sasaki nodded yes. There are reports with thin connections between Deca Sensei to villains whose mediocre quirks suddenly became useful enough to escape heroes in the top 50. People can train their quirks to be stronger, but things like that don't happen overnight, and with the knowledge that All for One's alias Sensei, it was a foregone conclusion. True, Sasaki explained, and Naomasa understood immediately. And as horrid as the thought of there being more of that man in the world, I can see All for One using women with particular quirks to create a child with a stronger version of his own, and he'd have plenty of time to wait for such a result. True, Sasaki elaborated, making Naomasa feel sick at the thought of hapless women being strung along by All for One just for a child. And that would be the best-case scenario for this kind of thing, but it was so believable when he thought it over. I wish I could say that wouldn't be possible, Naomasa grudgingly said, and Sasaki nodded, muttering a soft indeed. True. If that is true, then Deca Sensei might be just as dangerous as All for One, Naomasa pointed out, which is exactly why I've been trying to find out more about Deca Sensei. If I'm right, then the fact that All for One didn't kill or take the boy's quirk means something must be different about him for All for One not to do so. My current theory is that unlike his brother, Deca Sensei wasn't as rebellious, and from his movements I believe that the boy is taking after his predecessor. Sasaki confirmed, feeling a massive headache coming up in his future Naomasa sighed, and pulled up his sleeve and removed his nicotine patch, since it seemed to have expired without him knowing. We should probably get back inside. We're going to look suspicious if we stay out here for much longer, Naomasa suggested as he placed a new patch on his arm. Of course. I apologize for not contacting you earlier, Sakachi-san. Not bringing you in when I know how important this is to you as well was an oversight. True, Sasaki admitted, hands held behind his back, and avoided his eyes. Naomasa exhaled. It's something we'll have to deal with, though I understand your reluctance, given we didn't part on such good terms, he told the man before re-entering the station. Naomasa glanced around for Gang Orca, hoping he hadn't left just yet. He had excused himself after they had been fully briefed on the Deca Sensei situation, with Sasaki following shortly after to speak in private. And that talk was certainly enlightening, but Naomasa had a few questions that he wanted to ask Miyake. Successful in his quest, he spotted the man aiding Miyake with some paperwork. Gang Orca, Koi, can I have a few minutes of your time? Naomasa requested, walking over to the two. Gang Orca pursed his lips and glanced back over to Miyake. The boy in question merely tilted his head to the side. I don't see why not. True, Gang Orca conceded. What do you need, detective? The man inquired as he placed aside the papers. You mentioned earlier that Koi, your intern, has met Ren before, and the two seem to know each by name. I'd like to know how well you two knew each other, so I shall be asking Koi some questions about that, if that would be all right. Naomasa questioned. That would be acceptable. True, Miyake said, and Naomasa glanced at Gang Orca for confirmation it was all right. The man sighed before he nodded his head. All right. Koi, can you please tell me when you first met Namori Ren? Naomasa asked, pulling out his notepad. Miyake gave a soft thrill. It was perhaps either the third or fourth day after I moved into my apartment. We met in passing at one of the stores in Yaizu. True, the boy answered, surprising Naomasa. In Yaizu? That is farther from the Namori residence than your mentor's agency is. What was Ren doing so far from his home? Naomasa inquired, confused and a little concerned what the boy would be doing in a red light district. Running away from home. Only temporarily. When I asked, he said he wanted to be anywhere else, as long as it wasn't home. He didn't care where he was. I can remember him showing up at Yaizu fairly often to escape his home life, but he'd always go back for his father. True, Miyake responded. I see. So you were aware of the Namori's marital issues before Ren turned himself in? Naomasa questioned, and Gang Orca glanced at the boy. Yes, Rin-san was not shy in telling others of how abusive his mother was. True, Miyake answered simply. Naomasa glanced at Gang Orca and saw the man was similarly uneasy by the boy's admission. Did you ever bring this information to the attention of the authorities? Naomasa asked, unsure if he'd like the answer. Yes, 3 separate times. True, Miyake replied. What happened after you did? Naomasa pressed, knowing that no such reports of domestic abuse had been found in the database when he and the others searched for them, which was suspicious because the idea that it had gotten to this point, and it wasn't reported by any of their neighbors, was quite unlikely. Miyake blinked and tilted his head. The officer threw the report in the garbage. He wasn't subtle the second time, and they didn't bother writing up a third one the last time I came in. True, Miyake responded. What? Naomasa thought as one of his eyes twitched. Gang Orca wasn't so restrained, with both of his hands balled in fists. Do you know why they dismissed reports of domestic abuse? Naomasa questioned, and Miyake stared back at him. Though the boy's face wasn't very expressive, Naomasa distinctly got the feeling Miyake was giving him the "Are you serious?" face. Because Ren's father, Soki-san, is quirkless. True, Miyake answered. That's it? They didn't file the report because Namori Soki is quirkless? Naomasa pressed, because it was one thing not to file a domestic report, but it was another thing entirely if the crimes were purposely unfiled because of quirk discrimination of all things. Miyake blinked. Yes, the first time I gave a report of the situation at the Namori residence, they were all very serious about it until I told them Soki-san was quirkless. And while Ren was more than willing to testify, no one wished to take up the case without concrete proof, which was impossible to get because Akira-san's quirk, mending words, erased all of the damage she inflicted on Soki-san. True, Miyake explained in detail to them. I see. Thank you for informing me about this, Koi. I shall investigate this matter. Could you please attach the name of the precinct you went to and the names of the officers you spoke with in your report? Naomasa requested, resisting the urge to ask for their names directly, because if he was honest, he was pissed. It was bad enough they were being discriminatory, But this lack of accountability had led to a child being forced into a god-awful situation where he had to kill someone because they couldn't be bothered with doing their own job, something that was entirely unacceptable. I shall. True Miyake agreed with a light nod. Thank you, Koi. Given these circumstances, would you say you were close to Rin? Naomasa inquired, deciding to move on from the topic for now, since he'll have to do it later. Not particularly, we just spoke from time to time and would hang out a bit, but I wouldn't call us friends. True Miyake responded with a shrug of his shoulders. Naomasa nodded. And have you ever met either of Rin's parents? He asked to cover all the bases. No. Rin-san never invited anyone back to his house or brought his father to Yaizu. True Miyake replied simply. Okay, thank you for being so cooperative, Koi. If we have any other questions, we'll make sure to contact you for a follow-up. Naomasa told the two, placing the notepad back in his pocket. I'd like to remain in the loop on Ren's case if possible, Detective Sasaki. True Gang Orca requested as he and Miyake stood up. I'll see what I can do. Naomasa replied, walking away and pulling out his phone, preparing to call up his partner Tamakawa so they could get ready to file some corruption charges against one of the departments in Yaizu. Izuku sighed as he collapsed onto Tanaka-san's couch as he had just finished another day of work and stared up at the ceiling for a few seconds as he calmed his mind. Dabi had made quite a bit of progress with his quirk control, and Izuku suspected that he was training it when he wasn't there. Dabi could light his whole hand without focusing all his fire into it, made the candle flames do more than wiggle, and even made it into a ring. And though he could only do it with his right hand, he could put out the flames without touching them. And both Achiko-chan and Mizo-kun had made leaps and bounds with their quirks. Mizo-kun had almost perfected Achiko-chan's voice, which would be his fifth voice and his first female voice, and he managed to form something like scales which he could make thicker, but unfortunately, it was limited to his secondary limbs. Achiko-chan, on the other hand, had done her best to get rid of her nausea whenever she used her quirk on herself, but it wouldn't seem to go away even when Izuku got her some anti-nausea meds. She had also managed to figure out how to use both ways of her quirk at the same times. So once Achiko-chan got some more experience under her belt with that, he'd suggest she could try making other things heavier before floating herself. Plus, to top it all off, they had met someone recently and added him to their group chat, so they could talk a little since they haven't had the time to meet up in person, and this oasis seemed pretty nice over text so far. And once Achiko-chan spilled about his quirk and the fact he wanted to be a hero as well, Izuku probably spent a good chunk of the afternoon theorizing ways for Owae-san to maximize on his quirk's potential. And all that thinking had been an excellent distraction for what had been plaguing his mind since his meeting with Raven last week. Things were escalating in a way he hadn't accounted for when he first started his work in the districts, but then again, how was he supposed to know that he'd be threatening the reign of an evil overlord by just being nice to people? It was tempting to just bury himself in everything else he was doing, but he knew that would be a grave mistake for even thinking of doing it. Izuku had no idea how he'd become famous in public circles without being someone that would get crushed by public outrage with him defying what it meant to be a pathetic two-toes. He needed to spend quite a lot of time figuring out some kind of plan, but there was a more immediate issue that had come to mind, the fact he had almost no way to defend himself if one of All for One's men came to take him away. He had a taser, yes, but that was hardly a foolproof plan since some people had quirks that would make the voltage simply null and void. Izuku had gained some muscle, because even he would be daft to think all the running around wasn't going to make him stronger. He was faster than he had been before, certainly, but that was hardly going to last longer than a few minutes, if he was lucky enough to have someone that didn't have a speed quirk. He knew nothing of hand-to-hand unless those HeroTube videos he watched years ago were accurate, and even if they were, he hadn't been the most diligent student back then since his brain was scrambled. No matter whatever way he cut, it was clear he needed to learn some form of self-defense, and the thought of it cut him deeply. Learning martial arts for a future in heroics was something he could personally compromise on, but even then it felt wrong. This, however, wasn't something Izuku could afford to play around with. As it was now, everything he built relied solely upon him, and he had made it that way since he hadn't wanted to burden anyone else with his work, and with the very real threat of him disappearing in the near future, that was clearly a mistake that he'd need to correct as soon as physically possible. But that would take time and resources he currently didn't have. There were few ways he could change this, but he'd need to buy himself enough time to get those changes started, so he needed to learn some way to defend himself beyond his taser, and frankly, he didn't have the time to pick up on hand-to-hand at his current schedule, much less a full-fledged martial art. But he could learn one thing, even it was more unpalatable to him. He could learn to shoot a gun. An old law from the beginning of the First Quirk War had never been touched in Japan, having probably been long forgotten, but still enforceable as any other. One that allowed any citizen that were old enough to and proven capable could apply for a license to own and carry a gun in public, as well as the right to conceal carry them. There were shooting ranges available to him all over where he traveled. Compared to only having a few hours on a single day with an instructor, it was clear which would be more viable for him to do. Izuku let out a heavy sigh and took out his phone and typed in the number for the Vespas in Aomori. He hesitated before pressing the call button and held the phone next to his ear. "Hello, Deca Sensei. How may I help you?" A woman replied, having picked up almost immediately, something he had come to expect given the few times he's called them. They always picked up on the first ring. "I would like to speak with Raijin in person about something tomorrow. When is he available?" Izuku asked. The phone picked a soft hum as she presumably checked with someone. "He'll meet you at the station. You can speak on the train back." "Will that be acceptable, Deca Sensei?" the woman offered. "That should be fine. Thank you, Vespa-san," Izuku told her, running a hand through his hair. "Not a problem, Deca Sensei. We are happy to help," the woman calmingly replied before hanging up and leaving Izuku to feel morose over his decision. Well, he would have if Taka hadn't taken it upon himself to jump up on the couch and started licking at his face. Unfortunately, Izuku was still fighting off Taka's aggressive affection when Kikukuin got home. Izuku went through that Saturday like always, though he stopped by the sheep paddock for a bit longer than the last time before getting on out for his weekly Russian lesson, and managed to not let it slip about his meeting with Raijin, which was what he was hoping for Sensei-san might try to convince Izuku to train with him instead. Izuku would have been fine with that, but he didn't want Yusan asking why Izuku suddenly wanted a gun or changing his schedule to follow Izuku around the island. Walking to the station, Izuku weaved through the small crowd of people going home and tourists subtly looking for a white pair of ears as he made his way to where the train he always took home was, but hadn't managed to find any. Even as he stood within a meter of the train, he couldn't see Raijin anywhere, which was odd, because every other time he had a meeting with a Vespa, they were waiting for him. Slightly concerned, Izuku waited for a few more minutes, knowing he had at least 15 minutes before he'd had to check in with the train. Izuku didn't know Raijin personally, having met the man about twice before. But this situation made him feel a touch uneasy, and he pulled out his phone preparing to call the Aomori branch of the Vespas when some shouting got his attention. Turning his head, he saw Raijin storming away from another person with leopard features with a dark look on his face. "Raijin, do not walk away from Dash," the woman growled, her clawed hands reaching out for the man's ears, but the next second the woman wasn't far away, and her hand was on Izuku's arm. The woman stared at him, shocked and panicking. Izuku's eyes quickly searched for something he could use all over the woman's body, and spotted a familiar tattoo on her hip. Calming down, he looked the woman in the eyes and narrowed his gaze. "I doubt Papa Marsh would be too happy to know what just happened. Unless you want me to tell him what you just did, I strongly suggest you finish whatever business you have with Raijin later," he coolly told the woman, and saw her pupils shrink when he mentioned the man. "How Dash," the woman whispered. "Leave," Izuku said, not letting her finish her question. Showing some common sense, the woman held up her arms and begrudgingly walked away from him and Raijin. Glancing at his arm, there were some small cuts that wouldn't need more than for him to wipe them clean, and turned to Raijin. Having some experience with how tough people tried to hide how rattled they were, Izuku could immediately tell from how badly Raijin's ears were twitching as he forced them to stay upright. "Hello, Deca Sensei. Sorry for being late and dragging some personal business along with me," Raijin told him, and Izuku chose to ignore it for now. "It's fine, a minor inconvenience at most, Raijin. Now let's get on the train. I would prefer to speak in our room," Izuku replied, heading for the train, and Raijin nodded, quickly following after him. Izuku didn't bother doing anything with his luggage and simply dropped it on his bed for the night and rolled up his sleeve to treat the cuts. "So what do you need so badly that you wanted to see me in person?" Raijin asked, settling on a chair, one leg over the other. "I want to learn to shoot," Izuku answered, and he could see the man's eyes so big he was afraid they'd pop out of Raijin's skull. Whoa. Hold up. Forgive me if I've misheard, but ain't you some pacifist? Detest all violence and do no evil crap. Raijin questioned, and Izuku bit his lip and paused from treating his arm. I don't like hurting people, and I don't want to ever do that. But I'm sure you know that there are times where that isn't possible, especially once he starts asking questions. Izuku answered as he reached out for his luggage and searching for some band-aids. Understanding crossed Raijin's face. Should have figured a two-toes would know about him. I'd offer to help you find someone that could be a bodyguard for you. But I think we both know even if I could find someone trustworthy, they probably wouldn't be enough to keep you safe with him after you. Raijin conceded, glancing away. Izuku nodded. I want to learn how to shoot so I can protect myself. Knowing your family, you likely have access to shooting ranges all across Japan, shooting ranges that won't kick me out for being a two-toes. Izuku explained. Raijin sighed. Yeah, we do. I'll have to make some calls to the rest of the family, but it shouldn't be too hard to arrange. I'm guessing you want something small caliber? An easy-to-hide handgun? Raijin inquired, and Izuku nodded. Okay, we'll keep someone on hand to help you. How many days and for how long? Raijin asked. Every day except Sundays, for 2 hours in the afternoon after lessons. Until I'm ready to apply for my permit. And no, I don't want you guys to pull any strings for me to get one. Helping me find an unbiased range for my test, sure. But if I'm going to carry a weapon, I want to know I won't kill someone by accident. Izuku responded, a touch sterner as he said the last bit. Right, we'll do our best, but there ain't many places outside of police stations that aren't connected to someone, and I don't think you'll want to go to any of those. Raijin commented, and when he thought of it, Izuku felt his body tremble. No, Izuku would not want to go to a shooting range full of policemen. He would not be able to stop himself from shaking and nodded his head to show as much. Figured, I'll get everything ready by next Monday, and we'll have someone pick you up after lessons. Raijin promised, grabbing out his phone, and began to text someone. Thank you, I know this is just a favor, but I do appreciate it, Raijin. Izuku muttered, knowing he'd be heard. What can I say? I'm a man of my word. Besides, it ain't like you aren't a major boon to us. Not many people outside the family can handle our brood. Raijin joked, brushing the greenette off, and left Izuku to his own devices in the room he paid for. Elmo Vespa's eyes twitched as he was once again compared to the damn puppet from an old PQ show by some American tourist, and began cursing the show in his head for still being so popular that people were talking about it. Thank God he was old enough to start dyeing his fur/hair, or he'd never hear the end of it, well, more than he already was. To be fair to his father, though, Elmo knew how difficult it was to handle naming the almost hundreds of Vespa children something original but not ridiculous would be. And he had only intended to name him after the saint, but that didn't stop his siblings and cousins from teasing him with a bunch of pet rocks and googly eyes. Walking out of the cafe, Elmo scrolled through his messages, checking updates on his family's business, and if he was needed for anything, because even though he was only starting his second year of college, he had been working in the family business since he was 15, starting as simply a pair of eyes and ears. Now, though he had earned enough credit with the family to be a broker while he was working through college, and consequently that meant that he had a lot of meetings with people as the face of the Vespa family, which could get quite tedious since it felt like he had to meet at least 5 new people a day. Elmo rarely had last-minute meetings arranged, but not so few, he wasn't surprised to see a new one on his list and check the details for it. Client, Mastermind. Repeat customer number, 8. Status, Active Hero, Twilight, Rescue/Info, Deku approved. Info requested. On an info broker, unspecified. Elmo raised an eyebrow. Heroes usually didn't contact them for info, given they were technically on different sides. But it wouldn't be completely impossible with his family as good as it was, and some people were able to swallow their pride and ask for help, or in this case pay for some questionable outside help. But a repeat hero customer of 8 times? That was just unheard of, and he would have been suspicious of this mastermind. However, if Midoriya approved of this hero, Elmo would hold off on raising any of his concerns with his family. Midoriya rarely expressed positive opinions on heroes, so whenever he did, their database would be updated with this knowledge. His last count was around 57 officially Deku-approved heroes. So Elmo stopped to brush his, much nicer, brunette hair back, and quickly made his way back to the listed meetup spot and decided that the diner looked fine enough for some place near the red light district and calmly walked in with the patiently taught Vespa charm. A single glance around, and he spotted a lanky-looking blonde man in a striped shirt and jeans sat in one of the booths tucked in a corner. Elmo put on a lazy grin as he strolled over and pointed to the other half of the booth. "Is this seat saved?" he asked. Mastermind didn't lift his head and simply gave a light shake, and Elmo slid into the booth. "Well, it's lovely to see you again, Master. Glad to service a repeat customer." Elmo purred, placing his head on his folded hands. Mastermind gave a soft hum. "Indeed, though risky to interact with your family, your information networks are very accurate, if costly." Mastermind replied, nursing a cup of coffee that was brought by a waitress. "Would you like something, sir?" she asked, but Elmo waved her off, waiting for her to leave before trying to continue speaking. "So, you want some info on a broker, right?" Elmo inquired, and the blonde nodded. "There has been someone making quite a few waves, ones that have made Nisa take notice," Mastermind explained, and Elmo hummed in consideration. There were a few names that came to mind knowing what he did of Nisa's intelligence. Given his ties to some powerful syndicates, "I'm sure you would have heard something about him before," Mastermind commented, and Elmo scoffed, slightly bemused. It was a fair assumption given what Mastermind just told him, and the identifying gender of he narrowed it down to about 3 people. "Does this little broker have a name, Master?" Elmo questioned with his head tilted, curious now of this mysterious info broker. "Deca Sensei," Mastermind answered. Elmo's practiced personality was shattered. His playful demeanor dropped in 1 second as he rigidly sat upright with white-knuckled fists on the table, and his ears were pressed flat to his skull. Asterisk what? Midoriya? An info broker? Asterisk Elmo thought, confused and panicked, because while he could understand Midoriya being on Nisa's radar, but to be thought of as an info broker of all things? Elmo quickly recatalogued everything he knew of Midoriya and began cursing when he realized what it would look like to anyone else in the world. Because who in their right mind would think that some random dorky two-toes would be going around the country teaching lessons, handing out supplies, and helping people with their quirks and gaining a shocking amount of goodwill? Instead of the far more likely to be real idea that it was some scary up-and-comer in villain circles. Asterisk f***ing hell? Of course, they'd think that was what was happening. FCK. Of all the things we thought to prepare for when the heroes started asking questions, why didn't we think of this? Asterisk Elmo scolded himself for not considering the very obvious misconnection that would have happened and tried to regain some of his composure, but it would be hard to backtrack after such an overreaction. Mastermind. Elmo coolly said, "I'm afraid that you've wasted your time. I shall arrange for the money you've paid to be wired back to you, since we cannot help you with your request." Elmo told him, keeping his word choice far colder and professional than he was taught to in these situations. "Why? Is the amount I paid not enough for the information I want? I can offer you well over triple the amount I've already given you." Mastermind offered, and Elmo was caught between spitting in the man's face and laughing his damn ass off. Because Midoriya, in the short 9 months he's been traveling around the island, he had established himself as an irreplaceable piece of their organization that made them a shit ton of money by just existing. Dozens of people used their family to arrange meets with Midoriya. Hundreds of more people paid good money for the thorough quirk breakdowns Midoriya churned out. And then there were massive auctions for the information on people who had crossed Midoriya that never earned them anything less than 6,687,000 yen per person. That wasn't even taking into consideration about the millions they saved on schooling costs for their families' thousands of children by just having Midoriya teaching them instead of the traditional homeschooling, and more effective if the higher scores on all of his little siblings' tests were anything to go by. And this man thinks that he can just give them what would basically be some damn pocket change in return for the most valuable resource available to his family? It was laughably pitiful. But unlike some of his family, Elmo had a more personal reason to be protective over the boy. Saving his Sorella was only the tip of the iceberg when it came to his fondness for Midoriya. He rarely got to see the boy in person, but that didn't stop him from hearing the countless stories from his family about the endless acts of kindness he performed for their family without even thinking. Family was everything to the Vespas. It was the only thing they had in the world that would never change, and the only thing a Vespa should ever rely on. That was a value Elmo held more tightly than most. So with all Midoriya has done for his family, it was hard not to become attached to him. And the few times he spoke to Midoriya one-on-one at the college let him see well past the tough exterior he built. and he saw the bleeding heart underneath it all, though Midoriya never tried to hide it. And God be damned if he would ever sell the boy out to some random fucker he didn't know, Deku approved or not. There isn't enough money in the world. Elmo spat with a tightly clenched jaw, picking up his bag off the floor, and was about to stomp out of the dinner, but stopped after he got to his feet, as Midoriya's disappointed face briefly passed through his mind, and Elmo groaned, dragging a hand down his face. Turning back to Mastermind, Elmo took a deep breath before he spoke. Look, Mastermind, you've been good to the family, and you always paid up. That is the only reason I'm bothering to say this to you. Leave Deca Sensei alone. Let me assure you that if you keep digging, the only thing you're going to do is come up empty-handed, and this whole thing is more trouble than it's worth. Elmo told him before heading for the door, in quite a foul mood, knowing he'd have to talk with the family about this situation. It's not like you should be worried about him in the first place. Elmo grumbled under his breath as he walked out into the Basque late, spring early summer night. Isamu frowned as he walked home when it started sprinkling and opened his umbrella. The whole meeting hadn't gone to plan, but wasn't a total loss either. Paying for information from the Vespas had taught him that almost everything was for sale when it came to information, and this was the first time a Vespa had ever returned his money and told him to mind his own business. It was also the first time he'd seen one break their carefully held persona, something that was vital given their short height and relatively friendly look in criminal underground. But it had confirmed that Deca Sensei had ties with the Vespas and very strong ones at that, given the Vespa he met was so distressed, and that Deca Sensei had something that made him invaluable to the family as a whole. However, it was the Vespa's last parting comment he found himself thinking back to. The man clearly hadn't meant for Isamu to hear him, but it certainly gave him some pause. Asterisk, not someone I should be worried about? That would imply there is someone I should be worried about. Asterisk, Isamu thought as he pondered it. It wasn't something that he had considered, given the lack of any second name being thrown around alongside Deca Sensei's, but having a silent partner could be possible. Maybe if the partner had been around for such a long time no one spoke of them, because everyone knew them and around long enough to make strong ties to explain Deca Sensei's sway with the other groups. Isamu pursed his lips as he tried to think of someone that could fit the bill, but was coming up empty-handed and resolved to speak to Nizu about this theory later. He'd likely have a bigger pool of names to draw on than Isamu's current knowledge. A sudden chirping from his phone made him stop walking and check his messages. Dodo. Hey Himawari-senpai, could you come over? Show's had a bad day and needs some magic to zizzy it off. Sunflower. I'll be over soon. You're at home, right? Dodo, yes. Rat God pulled strings and forced Show to go home after an accident. Sunflower. How bad of a day? Dodo. 3's on fire. Sunflower. Understood. I'll bring the special eye mask. Isamu sighed, his heart feeling a touch heavier as he thought of the possible misfortune that could have plagued Shoyuta. Shoyuta has always suffered from dry eye, but it rarely got to the point where it felt like they were on fire. That was the reason that Isamu started carrying around a cooling eye mask and meds for headaches. Unfortunately, this was because Shoyuta has never taken very good care of himself, even back when they were in UA, but it had gotten worse recently, since he has been trying to track down his Yaizu vigilante, and something more on Deca Sensei, since there were resources available now, all on top of his regular hero work and teaching. What a silly little kitten. Asterisk, Isamu thought, fondly exasperated with the man as he got ready to get a ride to Shoyuta and Hisashi's apartment. Yosetsu woke up with a big yawn, and as he was stretching out his back, gave a couple of pops. Fuck. What time is it? Yosetsu thought, rubbing one of his eyes, and glanced at his alarm clock. Asterisk 5:34. Huh? Damn. Asterisk, Yosetsu mentally huffed, bemused as he got up and went into the bathroom to get himself ready for the day. A quick shower later, Yosetsu was wrapping his hair up in a bandana and used his quirk to fuse the ends of it together so it wouldn't come undone. Something he'd often do when he knew that he'd have a more active day than normal, and he was definitely expecting today to be hectic. He had plans to go with Yukai to visit Gigi, as he had nicknamed his friends, to practice using his quirk, and to top it off, he was finally going to meet Zuri in person, and he knew that it was going to be pretty dope. In the few days he'd been added to his friends group chat, he knew enough about Zuri to know he was a bit of a scatterbrain, but the funny and smart kind. Zuri was such a riot sometimes, and he definitely had the best ideas when it came to using his quirk. He may or may not have been using Zuri's impressively big brain to help him with his history homework. But he wasn't the only person in the chat who did it. The three of them all just sucked when it came to history as a subject. Zuri said it was important, but it was hard to find ways to care about some random fuckwits from back during the pre-colonial era. Zuri sure as hell tried, though, and was even successful sometimes. Mainly with the whole saga of Ernest Hemingway, who was a hardcore bastard even if no one else in his class believed him about a quirkless person being able to survive that much crap without a quirk. Yosetsu was still bitter the teacher only gave him a B on that paper because he wasn't exaggerating about the man's hyper-unlikely survival in near-death situations and told his friends as much. Zuri came to his rescue, though, and provided him with a crap ton of articles to prove that yes, Ernest did shoot himself in the leg while aiming at a shark, twice, said articles he rubbed in his history teacher's face when he contested his grade. But that was neither here nor now, and Yosetsu needed to get his things together if he didn't want to miss breakfast before heading off to school. Okay, that Yagami-sensei can just do one at this point. Yagami-sensei had asked him to stay behind to speak to him about something, and if that idiot held him up any longer than he would have missed the train Yukai had told him to catch, which would have majorly sucked since he was supposed to meet her on said train. He would have to wait to meet up with her for a few stations, so Yosetsu settled in and scrolled some of his hero feeds to catch up on some of his favorites. And as one would expect, when you really get caught up in something, Yosetsu lost all track of time and didn't even realize that Yukai was on the train until she was heading towards him. Awakun, Yukai called, waving as she rushed over to him. Oh hey Yukai, wait, were we supposed to change into our gym shit before we came? Because then I must have totally spaced on that part. Yosetsu asked, quickly double-checking the group chat. Yukai blinked, huh? Oh. No, there's no dress code for this. You just need to wear something you can comfortably move around in, and don't mind getting a bit messy, Awakun. Yukai assured him, waving her hands. Oh, that makes sense, and you wanted to wear your gym stuff? Yosetsu guessed, and she nodded. Yeah, I've been working on my stamina more, and these don't restrict me as much. Besides, Izuku wants me to try something while floating myself, and wearing a skirt isn't ideal for that. Yukai answered. Yeah, good call on your part, Yukai. Yosetsu said, agreeing that a skirt wouldn't be ideal when you're floating. Wait, this wasn't where I was going with the conversion. Have you ever been to Gigi's place before? Yukai questioned, and Yosetsu frowned. No. I've never been to either of your houses. Yosetsu said after a moment, and Yukai bit lip. Okay, so this might be shocking, but you have to promise you won't think badly of Gigi. Yukai told him, looking slightly nervous. Promise. Yosetsu agreed, confused where she was going with this, and a bit concerned why she thought he'd ever think badly of the big doofus. Gigi was a big nerd that was rocking the gentle giant thing, and it was pretty hard to think of anything negative about the guy. Gigi lives in the south side, and that's where we're going to meet with him and Izuku. Yukai explained, and Yosetsu couldn't stop his mouth from falling open. Wait. Gigi lives in the south side? The south side. The one that got fucking condemned south side? Yosetsu questioned, and Yukai nodded, rubbing the back of her neck. Yosetsu unashamedly stared at Yukai as his brain worked to comprehend what she told him, and when it did, he couldn't help saying the first thing that came to mind, for fuck's sake. You guys keep getting more badass every day. Do you know that? He exclaimed with a massive grin. Yeah. Yukai squeaked, shocked. Why you think we're what you said? She asked, and Yosetsu chuckled at her. PFF, hell yeah. It's no wonder you and Gigi are so fucking cool if you're training your quirks out there. Yosetsu confirmed, feeling super pumped, cause how could he not when he'd somehow got to hang around with such awesome people and was now going to be training with them as well. Me? Yukai cried, pointing to herself in disbelief. Duh. You got to have a pretty big pair to be going to the south side like every other day. I mean, Gigi lives there, and that's fucking cool, but you're choosing to go there, and that takes like a fuck ton of courage on its own, Yukai. Yosetsu replied, and Yukai's face turned slightly pink as she turned away from him, rubbing her neck again. Thanks, Awakun. That's nice of you to say. But one of the things about the south side is that you shouldn't just go wandering around on your own. So when we get to our stop, you have to follow me really closely. Got it, Awakun? Yukai instructed, quickly recovering and turning stern. Of course, Yukai. Yosetsu agreed before a thought suddenly occurred to him. Hey, wait a minute. Do they even have a quirk center in the south side, Yukai? Yosetsu asked, and Yukai smiled with a little giggle. That was what I was worried about too when I started training with Gigi, and they don't have a quirk center per se, but Izuku has a community center that we can use to train our quirks in. Yukai explained. Yosetsu's brain blanked for a moment. Zuri owns a building? Yosetsu questioned, because he was pretty sure Zuri was supposed to be their age. Wasn't he? Yukai snorted. I know. Izuku is actually my parents' biggest client, and he pays them to fix up all the properties he buys, she confirmed, looking somewhat amused. He has enough money to buy multiple buildings? Yosetsu exclaimed, wondering why he hadn't heard of this before now, because that's a pretty big thing to overlook. Yukai's face softened with sympathy. Something you'll come to learn about Izuku is that he makes no sense sometimes. Like he's working to get his 5th degree from college and finds the time to buy buildings, while working with a bunch of people on their quirks and teaching lessons all at the same time. She elaborated, not making him feel any better. Yosetsu slumped in his seat. I need to up my fucking game if I want to keep up with such a cool-ass group of people. He groaned into his hands, though Yukai was quick to defend him and told him he was cooler than he thought he was. Their arrival at the station wasn't that bad, but Yukai had grabbed his uniform jacket sleeve and began tugging him along, and he might have felt like she was patronizing him, but once they got to the edge of the south side, he knew why she had done it. The change was so drastic he would have likely wandered off just to see everything in the district, because some of the ruined buildings were actually cool looking. Hey hamster, what you got there? A guy suddenly asked, catching his attention, and he froze upon seeing the man, mainly because the tank top he wore gave Yosetsu a full and censored view of the damage to his right arm, something that he admittedly couldn't look away from because he had never seen that level of damage on anyone in his life before. Oh, hey Dabi-san, this is Awaku, and he's going to be training with us now. Yukai answered, giving him a tug, and Yosetsu came back to himself and looked away for his arm and to Dabi's face. Dabi's eyes were looking him over, and he had a bright green popsicle in his mouth. Dabi shrugged. As long as he keeps his eyes to himself, you probably won't have any trouble. The Twinkies and Spider Boy are waiting for you at the center. Dabi called over his shoulder as he walked off. Yukai nodded. Okay, thanks Dabi-san, she said before changing direction. Come on, we have to go this way now. Yukai informed him, and she dragged him along. Yosetsu wanted to ask her about Dabi, but decided now wasn't the time to ask since he'd have time later, and that asking what happened to the guy wasn't something he should do after he so blatantly stared at the man's arm. And Yosetsu didn't have enough time to think of an appropriate way to ask before they were standing in front of a large building with obvious black scorch marks on it, and curiously untouched by graffiti. They must be inside already. Come on, Awa-san. Yukai guessed, and once she opened the doors, Yosetsu saw how much bigger the building looked inside. Awaku over here. Yukai called from somewhere off to the side, but she was still beside Yosetsu. So he was confused, until Yukai looked like she was going to burst from happiness as she rushed off to a corner. You've copied my voice perfectly that time, Gigi, she exclaimed as stood in front of the big guy, and Gigi smiled bashfully at her. Thank you, Yukai. Gigi said with one of the hand mouths, making it sound kind of like Yosetsu's voice. Dude, when the hell were you going to tell me you could do voices? That's so cool. Yosetsu asked, finding himself learning more about his friends today than the chats they had over the past few days. Thank you, but Mito-kun was the one that suggested it to me. Gigi explained, nodded to his side, and Yosetsu noticed the other boy with them and cursed himself, since how could he have missed the bushy greenette? He wasn't even behind Gigi, so he really didn't have any excuse for not seeing him. Hello, Away-san. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and it's nice to meet you in person. Izuku cheerfully greeted him with a wave. Yosetsu grinned and offered his hand. Away's Yosetsu. It's great to finally have a face to put to your name, Zuri, he replied, ecstatic as Zuri shook his hand. Zuri wasted no time in leading Yosetsu, though the stretches Zuri had apparently taught Yukai and Gigi when they started training, since Zuri insisted that training their bodies was just as important. Then Zuri asked to see him use his quirk so that he could get a better understanding of how Yosetsu's quirk worked. Not having any problem with this, he first fused and unfused the bottom of his shoes together like when he showed Yukai and Gigi. Then he fused and unfused Zuri's hands together when he asked. Zuri was muttering something under his breath the whole time. Away-san, do you have great grades in physics and chemistry? Zuri asked, surprising him. Yeah? How do you know? Yosetsu inquired while Zuri beamed at him. Well, while I was studying for my quirk degree, I came across some old studies from the First Quirk War that stated that quirk people have a natural affinity for sciences and areas of study their quirks are based in. It was rattled with a bunch of quirkist ideas and rhetoric, but from what I have observed, it's not entirely unbased. For instance, Mizo-kun always had an A+ in biology, and his quirk is all based on manipulating his own body. Zuri explained. Basically, look at it as a quirk person's brain is hardwired for the things involving their quirk, like how a duckling instinctively knows how to swim from the moment they're born. Your quirk probably lets you manipulate the atomic structure of things so that they're fused together. Have you ever tried to reshape something before? Zuri inquired. Oh, yeah, I've tried, but it didn't do shit, so I can just attach things to each other. Yosetsu answered, rubbing the back of his neck. I see. Unfortunate but understandable. Quirks aren't limitless. Even the most powerful quirks have drawbacks we can't account for without experimentation. I want you to try something. Take this poll, and I want you to try to explain how it feels when you turn on your quirk. Say everything that happens as it happens, and don't spare any details. Zuri requested as he handed over a metal pole that looked like something that came off a fire escape. Totally down to indulge Zuri's curiosity, Yosetsu took the pole and turned on his quirk. Well, I guess it starts by focusing on my hands. Then this warm buzzing or tingling feeling starts to build up in my palms, and the part of the pole I'm holding is starting to feel like Play-Doh or more liquidity putty. And when I press it against something like the floor here, I can feel this, I don't know, sensation? Presence maybe? But I know I can feel that these things can be linked together if I make the buzzing more intense. Yosetsu said, trying his best to describe it as he fused the pole to the floor. And when I want to undo it, I have to think that, and the buzzing turns into a colder. No, a numbness instead of the warmth. Then I press my hand to the spot I fused and can separate them because they still feel like different things, I guess, or they still feel different enough for me to tell, so I can sort them? Yeah, sort them back into their original places and just pull them away, and they're two things again. Yosetsu told him, getting a bit more confident as he narrated his actions. Zuri nodded with a hum. I see. Can you push the buzzing into the pole? He asked, and Yosetsu raised an eye. I can try to do that when I was a kid, but my hands started to feel like they were burning, but that was probably from me being a dumbass. Yosetsu agreed, turning his quirk on again, and he felt the buzzing. He tried to push it into the pole, but his hands started burning up again, so he stopped and tried to do something else. Thinking of the buzzing more like a liquid state, he focused on it flowing through the body of the pole. It still made his hands uncomfortably warm, but it was bearable as his senses expanded to include the area around the pole. Oh, okay, that is a very weird feeling. Yosetsu commented, feeling a slight shiver creep up his back, but couldn't help smiling. Zuri practically beamed as he asked him to do more things, and Yosetsu readily did them with nothing short of excitement while Yukai and Gigi did whatever they were doing. Zuri also would note all the ways he could use the things he learned in his future hero work, and even compared it to some other heroes' moves. Damn, this is so fucking cool. Yosetsu said as he climbed the wall by fusing and unfusing the end of some poles to the wall and slowly made his way back down. Wiping away the sweat on his forehead and turned to Zuri, who was scribbling away in a notebook and muttering something that sounded like gibberish as Yukai was gleefully jumping around under her quirk. Yosetsu huffed bemused as he walked over and placed his elbow on Zuri's shoulder. You really know your shit when it comes to this whole training to be heroes thing. Are you planning to become a hero too, Zuri? Yosetsu inquired since it would make sense. He was such a cool guy, and Yosetsu could definitely see how much of a 5-star badass he'd be. Zuri, however, completely froze, blinked, then stiffly turned his head and stared at him, completely taken aback. His mouth opened then closed. What? He whispered. Surprised, you being a hero. What else could I mean? You'd be such damn boon to the industry. Yosetsu replied, and that seemed to get Yukai and Gigi's attention, and Yukai loudly gasped. Oh my gosh, you totally would, Izuku. You've helped Gigi and I so much with our quirks, and you know so much about heroics. I can't believe I haven't thought about it before. I can see it now. With a little combat training, and that analysis quirk of yours could have you in the top 100 easy. Yukai cheerfully proclaimed as she came back down to the ground and was practically bouncing in place. Zuri's grip tightened, and he ducked his head, avoiding their eyes, and biting his lip Midori doesn't have an analysis quirk, Yukai. Gigi said, and she stopped bouncing. Oh, so it's some kind of general intelligence quirk then? Or some kind of insight quirk? It's still really cool. Yukai said, I'm quirkless Achiko. Zuki told her, looking like he just wanted to disappear as he hugged his closed notebook to his chest. Oh. Yukai mumbled, fully shocked. So, all that brain power is natural? Dude, can you get any more badass? Yosetsu said, feeling even more in awe of his friend, which caused Zuri's head to snap to him with wide eyes. Be badass. Zuri squeaked. Hell yeah, Zuri. You're super smart, and you don't have a quirk-based learning curve that's holding most of us back, so once you get some hand-to-hand stuff down, you be a shoe-in for a hero. Yosetsu confirmed with fist pump. Zuri stared at him dumbstruck. You think I could be a hero without a quirk? Zuri asked, completely in disbelief as he stared back at him. Well, yeah, there's a ton of heroes with some arguably minor quirks that you could easily recreate with some basic support gear. You could absolutely become a modern-day Batman, and I'd totally be down to be your Robin if you need a sidekick. Yosetsu promised with a wink. Zuri's mouth opened, then closed, his bottom lip trembling as his eyes began to tear up, making Yosetsu suddenly feel like he fucked up. Hey, Zuri dash. Yosetsu tried to speak, but Zuri launched at him, knocking them both over, which did make his ass sore. But he was more concerned with how Zuri was basically sobbing into his chest. Izuku, Mido-kun. Yukai and Gigi both cried out, shocked and surprised by his frankly worrying emotional reaction, and were quickly crouched beside them, and it was by then that Yosetsu realized that Zuri was muttering something. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Zuri whimpered between his stuttered breathing, a tone of voice Yosetsu had never heard before in his life, but when he took a moment to really think about it, a chilling realization took hold of him. If he had been deemed almost useless and harassed by his classmates with his quirk, then how would most people react to someone quirkless wanting to be one? The answer sat like lead in his gut, and Yosetsu wrapped his arms around Zuri in a firm hug. It's no problem, Zuri, just saying the truth. If you were a hero, you would be one of the greatest out there, no contest. Yosetsu said with a self-assured nod. Yosetsu wasn't the smartest person in the world, and he normally had the emotional tact of a falling brick. He'd probably never know how bad it got for his friend, but it wouldn't be that hard to imagine how alone Zuri once was as he dreamed of being a hero. And if Zuri ever wanted to take the plunge and try out for heroics, then sure as shit would he, Yukai, and Gigi back him up every step of the way. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Villain Deku Became a Teacher at U.A. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Bloomerbill for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.